And right now, talking about some of the best ways to help your children or your grandchildren deal with some of the smaller stuff in life. I mean, it might seem small and you want them to cope with it a little better, but maybe their resilience isn't quite where it needs to be. So how do you approach that when your child's having difficulty dealing with a situation, like not coming first in the race, for example? How do you build their resilience? What happens at your place when your little Mr. or Missy doesn't get that blue ribbon in the running race or the lead role in the school musical? 1300 222 720 to call through, and the text 0437 922 720. What happens at your place and how do you go about teaching resilience to your kids? Claire Orange is a parent educator. She's here in the studio. Happy to get your calls this afternoon. So if you've got a situation, a bit of a sticky situation at your place, call through, run it past Claire, and maybe get a handy hint or two. 1300 222 720. Claire, good to have you in the studio.
Hi, Belinda.
Thank you for coming in. Do you think we focus on resilience far more than any other generation of parents?
In some ways we do. In some ways we focus on resilience. We have conversations about it, but then we have these practices that don't really build resilience in children. I mean, any parent would know that there's kind of a bit of a looking down your nose at the parent that lets their child play in the park unsupervised after school. That by other parents. We have children's sport where we don't score for fear of, hurting their little feelings. And so we want our children to be resilient, but we're not actually providing a lot of platforms for them to develop that resilience.
I find, when you mentioned the sporting reference, even though sometimes everyone gets a prize or sometimes there are no prizes or no scoring, as you said, they still know what's going on.
Of course they do.
They know who the best person playing on the field is.
Of course they do. And we think for some reason that we're kind of shielding them from that. But they know it, and then it kind of almost becomes this thing to have to talk about and rationalise. And then if you're the kid, say, for example, on sports day who doesn't win the race, someone's got to make a comment about, well, darling, you're good at spelling. So instead of just being a fact of life that you're not going to be good at everything, we have to try and find ways to build up that little person. And that's kind, but, part of life is learning to deal with those things, and they are hard. They're really hard.
Parent educator Claire Orange in the studio. So if you've got some handy hints about building resilience in children or just want to run past a situation going on at your place right now, before you get to the weekend, and you might just sort it out this afternoon, 1300 222 720 is the number to call, and Kathy's called through. Hi, Kathy.
Oh, hello. How are you going?
Yeah, great, Kathy. What did you want to say?
Just that I've got 4 kids ranging in age from 13 to 25, and they all have different levels. They all have different ways of dealing with whether they achieve or they don't achieve. Like, they're all very individual. And even though we've brought them all up the same, they're all really different.
Mm-hmm. So is that a personality thing, do you think, Kathy?
I think it's personality, and it's what they grow up seeing as well with their older brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
My youngest seems to be quite resilient. Like, she's grown up seeing lots of things happening in the house with the older kids growing up, and she seems to be very resilient, whereas my oldest, who's been hit back a bit in life, seems to have a bit of a, life's against me sort of attitude.
Mm-hmm. Kathy, good to hear from you this afternoon. What do you think about that, Claire? Personality comes into play there, or how is it that in one family, the same parents, and each of them can be so different?
Yeah, all right. Well, Kathy, I'm also one of those big breeders with 4 kids, and I agree with you. Out of my 4 kids, they've all got different levels of resilience and in different ways. So, while one might be very courageous and get up on a stage and sing, if he has to go to the school canteen and buy his own lunch, that's pretty much he's not doing that. So they can be resilient in some ways, but not in others. And I do think it's, the more kids you have, the more the younger one is going to pretty much bounce their way through life. But that's not always the case. And I think it's a good mix of modelling, how we model being resilient, and the package that our children come with.
1300 222 720 to call through and run past your situation at your place with your children. Maybe you've got a great way of managing a situation when things don't quite go the way your child wants it to go? What do you do at your place? 1300 222 720. Sean, hello.
Good evening, ladies. How are we?
Going
Good,
well,
Sean.
Sean. What happens at your place?
Well, I'm a father of 5 children, ranging from 29 through to 5, and
Wow.
they're all girls.
Oh,
So not only teach them resilience, but having all girls. My girls don't believe in if there's any problem in equality or anything like that. If you want it, you've got to go for it. You've got to work for it. But I also believe my kids fall. They tend to hit the ground. They know what it's like to have to pick themselves up too.
yeah.
There's nothing wrong with it. But, wrapping your kids up in cotton wool and saying that everybody's special or everybody gets a prize, I think you're setting your kids up for a fall.
Thank you, Sean.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, Sean, you're so right. And I think some of the things you talked about there, those key factors that underpin a child being resilient of, life's not always fair. I think, there's some good learning in that for a child, and we call them tolerable stresses for children, things they can tolerate. They might not like them. And I think there's more we can do in homes as parents to help our children kind of figure that stuff out.
That's interesting because Jane has sent through a text and says it depends how the parents respond when they don't win. How important is that parent response?
It's essential. It's amazing. I've got a little video. There's a YouTube clip and there's a little 16-month-old girl and she's using the mobile phone like her mum. So she's just babbling and you can just see she's just her mum. She's got the whole swag happening. And they're such sponges, our children. They're so mouldable. So, if you're going to the shopping centre and you don't get the closest car park and you lose your lolly, it's sending a really loud statement to your child that when they don't get to the front of the line at school, they can get picked as the line leader, that losing the lolly is really the thing to do because you're a big important person in their lives. And as are our teachers, kids will model themselves on teachers too.
1300 222 720 to call through and catch up with parent educator Claire Orange in the studio taking your calls this afternoon. We're focusing on resilience in children, but if you've got something else going on at your place and just want to run it past Claire, feel free to call through this afternoon. Hi, Margaret.
Hello, my dear. I've got a different outlook on life. Our children are 62, 60 and 58. They had a very strict upbringing. They didn't step out of line. They left home to get married. They've all got their own homes and they've all got bloody good trades.
Oh, fantastic.
It's being old-fashioned.
Well, actually, Margaret, I think you've hit on something really important there. Part of resilience is learning to work within boundaries. So you said you were strict. So your children had boundaries. They knew how to work within them and they knew that if they tipped over the edge that they'd have a consequence. And that's really good for building resilience because it means that your child had to learn how to manage life within a set of parameters and that sometimes they weren't fair. So maybe they had to stay home and not go to a party because there wasn't a parent to supervise. And you just were like, well, get over it. That's just the way it is. That's such good stuff. We have to put boundaries around our children. They're psychologically healthy and healthy because they do help them to build those patterns of coping with life. So I think you've got some gold.
Thank you for that, Margaret. I'm getting the sense that if you have a child and he or she is not coping well, not showing great resilience, then it's really up to you as the parent to change your behaviour to make an influence. Is that part of it, or how do you if you've got a child that's showing these sort of signs, what's the best approach?
Right. Well, again, some of our children come with a temperament where they take the knocks of life rather dramatically. Everything is rather catastrophic for them. And it doesn't matter if you're the most chilled out, calm parent, you end up with this hyper-wired little being who doesn't bounce through life particularly well. So that's then not on you as a parent. But what is on you as a parent is when you are being resilient. Say, for example, let's go back to that one of not getting the closest park and the rain is pouring down. You have to run through the rain and you've already had a bit of a rubbish day, is that you explain to your child how this is being resilient. So using the word, saying being resilient means that I cope with these things in life. What happens when you have things that you don't like happen to you? How do you cope? And make them explicit conversations for your child. These become very hidden for some children. And when you explain it and you use those words often, then they start to figure out actually how to bounce back.
11 to 4, ABC Radio Perth, and talking about children this afternoon and resilience in children with Claire Orange in the studio to take your calls. A few more minutes if you want to get through now, 1300 222 720 to call through. On text, Claire, this one's quite a good point. No name on it, but it says that's all very well, but some children never get that recognition because they may not ever really be at the front of the race or the class. How do you keep up that child's confidence?
Well, I think one of the important things as parents is to know your child's strengths and what they do well, and to help your child shine in other ways. So it is hard. The kid who just turns up to footy and they're not particularly good at it, but they turn up every week and, they try really hard, but they're not the kid who ends up with the medal. And they turn up every week and they try really hard in class and they don't get the award at the end of the year. It's hard for those kids. So you have to go for a strength-based approach. What is your child good at? What do they shine at? Do more of that stuff and celebrate that stuff. Make that something that you send through to the school and get put into the school newsletter. Because for some of our little kids, they try hard at everything, but they're never going to be recognised as the top of anything because they're just the kid who's going to sit in the middle of the pack, but they might try really hard to be there. So you have to find the thing. It might be that they're fantastic at the worm farm at school. Do more of that stuff. And find ways to recognise your child. We've got to get that stuff right. And it's a terribly difficult one.
Bernie has sent through a text, and this is so true that, I even remember things Mum said to me when I was a little girl, and that comes back to haunt them many years later. This is Bernie's story. Evidently, I told my daughter when she was at school not to become a dumb dancer. At 30, she still remembers this. I felt so bad, but it has inspired her onto better things. She's now teaching dancing. I said sometimes parents say dumb things. Bernie, that's true. Sometimes we do. And Jeremy says, needles are a classic example. When the mum or dad makes a fuss over their small child getting an injection, they'll pick up on that emotion and cry their eyes out. The child with the more stoic parents will be more likely to take it on the chin.
Yeah. And I think it's all right to show your children that you find things difficult. I've got the 4 boys and I struggle taking them for immunisations. I probably cried more than they did. But that's okay if you acknowledge that to your child and say, gee, I'm finding this really hard today. I'm not being very resilient about it. That's great learning for a child because you're going to say, but what I am doing is I'm managing myself and I'm taking some deep breaths and I'm saying to myself, I'm going to be all right, just do it. So that's great learning for your children. You don't have to cope with everything. In fact, if you don't cope with stuff and you let your kids know and find a healthy way out of it, that's really positive.
Pete in Mount Lawley says, what age can that conversation start, please?
Those conversations, well, it depends the sort of language that you use with your children. So right from early days and they would have been little boys, we've talked about patterns of super thinking. So super thinking is that positive, enabled, empowered thinking that you do. So, for example, with the 4 boys, sometimes the back toilet, as you can imagine, they don't always get the direction right. So it's a bit manky at the end of the day. But they've always had to take a night a week of cleaning the toilet. So they all moan and groan and carry on. Well, it's pretty good to teach them some super thinking for doing things they don't like. So super thinking is, what's the super thinking? The sooner I start, the sooner I finish. It's not that bad. Cleaning a toilet never killed anyone. What can we teach our children? Because you can do that for homework. You can do it for getting into the front seat of the car. There's lots of ways we can do that with our kids, and we can do it from early, 3 or 4, not too early to have those conversations.
Ken, hello.
Hello, yes. You're talking about parents being stoic. This wasn't the case with my mother at my first day at school. The school I was supposed to go to, which was nearby, wasn't built at that time. It was going to be ready for the next year, so we had to go to the next nearest, which was East Victoria Park School. And my mother took me up to the up the road, and she was really worried about me having my first day at school. And I was wondering what was going on, and then our school bus turned up, and it was a taxi. And I was so happy And there's Mum worried about me being, first day jitters, and I just couldn't wait to get into the taxi.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was 5 of us. That was our school bus for a year.
That's fantastic.
Thank you so much for sharing that this afternoon, Ken. I remember Mum tells a story about when I was the eldest. So when I went to school, I got out of the car, never looked back. And Mum bawled her eyes out because she wanted me to turn around and look back at her and be a little bit, I'm sad. But I just straight ahead, eyes ahead and keep walking, whereas my youngest brother was just clinging. His fingers needed to be peeled off the pole around at the school outside the classroom to get him in the classrooms. Everyone, it's different, isn't it?
It is different. And I think that point that Ken is making is an important one, that, sometimes what we find is scary and big and overwhelming. Kids just cope with. A few years ago, or 10 years ago, we picked up and moved to the UK for 2 years just on a whim. And, everyone was like, oh, how are the boys going to cope and how are they going to transition? Well, they just did it. Because they're kids, they are resilient little beings. And I think we start to sweat like, Ken's mum was sweating him getting into this cab. He thought it was an adventure of a lifetime.
Oh, he loved the idea of that. Claire, great to have you in the studio this afternoon. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Claire Orange is a parent educator and talking about resilience in children this afternoon. ABC Radio